How you doing, everybody? Thanks for coming. Thank you for taking time out of the con to share this room with us. This is the Storyboarding for Live Action Feature Films panel. My name's Jeff. I'm joined by a collection of really accomplished, amazing board artists, and I will let them introduce themselves down the row.
Are we starting here?
Don't everyone jump in at once. It's fine.
I'm Doug Lefler.
I'm Amy Umezu.
Josh Sheppard.
Aaron Sowd. Bill Thompson.
And I'm Jeff Henderson, and it's not working here. Oh, wait, I'll hit play. How about that? Aaron did this beautiful, synced up slideshow that's... There we go.
Don't oversell it.
So is everyone here more or less, I mean, obviously it's a live action panel, but have you guys had any storyboarding experience? Do you aspire to do storyboards? Do you come from comics, come from animation, come from video games? God help you. Cool. Okay, so I guess the first thing out of the gate, because everyone here really does bring a lot to the table, so, and any of you can jump in whenever you like. I'm just interested, like, how you got into art, how you got into storyboarding. Like, was it, I mean, everyone kind of has their gateway. Is it comics, is it animation, is it Alex Toth, is it Ray Harryhausen? Like,
For me, it was comic books, but they were too expensive as a kid, and there was a used bookstore down the street that had all the 1960s Marvel stuff, and so I was lucky to start on, you know, all the great stuff like Jack Kirby and all that, and that got me hooked. And then How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
Oh, that was a big book for me too. How to Draw Comics the Marvel. Yeah, but I got into art. Yeah, through. I just always loved drawing, and I loved comic books. Dan Jurgens.
oh, there you go.
Jurgens was for me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Death of Superman.
Yes, definitely. No, I love Superman, as you can see. So it's sad that he died, but that series is.
I got good news. He's back.
Yeah, that's what got me into drawing. But in terms of storyboards, that's a whole other story. I don't know if y'all want to hear it. So I was interested in going into comics. At the time, you know, WonderCon was going on, and I took some stuff, and who was big? Jim Lee was big, Todd McFarlane, who else was around that time? Like Rob Liefeld. Silvestri. Basically, I took my portfolio there, and they're like, no, you suck. Like, you know, your stuff is not even like the mainstream. So I also wanted to do animation, and I thought, okay, I want to, you know, maybe I could get, I had no idea about storyboarding in live action or animation at that time. And I wanted to do animation. I took some classes. It was traditional animation still. I was learning about in-betweens, and I said, F this. I don't think I could do this for the rest of my life. And then at the same time, Toy Story was coming out, Toy Story 2. And I said, oh, there's no jobs in animation anyway. So, because of all that, my parents were like, you can't go to art school. So I went to four-year university and studied art and general studio art, and a teacher there introduced me to storyboarding through a composition class.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and of all things, what he showed me was Ally McBeal storyboard.
To the dancing baby and stuff.
Well, I don't know, but I mean, but the class was a composition class, and he was just showing about how, you know, the background and the actors and everything was composed to give an image that we even watch on TV that they use composition, and that just, I was like, wow, storytelling, and it's like animation, and it's like comic books, but it's a whole new thing. And then I just went to use bookstores, the library, whatever I could find, the internet, and learned about it. And I just went from there and made up my own portfolio, faked it till I made it, and then
Nice.
got jobs on Craigslist and Mandy.com and, you know, whatever I could find until I was able, and then I started doing independent films for AFI students and spec work, and then just built up from there. So that's my story.
1977, I believe I'm the oldest person on this panel, but in 1977 I was hired at Walt Disney Pictures along with three of my classmates who were Jerry Reese, John Musker, and Brad Berg. 1977, some of you may remember from film history, was when Star Wars opened up. It was kind of a surprise that I ended up in animation. I didn't set out to do that, but I wanted to work in the film business, and so when they offered me a job, I said yes. But I wanted to make a segue into live action, and I was working in the story department in animation, so I figured storyboards were a good way to make that transition. There was a gentleman who was working in the animation building, but was storyboarding a live action film. And this guy had started his career working with John Ford and Alfred Hitchcock. When I met him, he was doing Herbie Goes Bananas. And he joked that he started his career at the top and he was working his way down. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, okay, well, I'm happy to give you whatever advice I can, but I have to warn you, if you go into storyboarding, it's a dead-end job. It pays okay, but you won't be able to go from storyboarding to doing anything else. You can't become an art director, you can't become a production designer, your career will stop here. So if you still want me to tell you what I know, I will. And I said yes. But when I left his office, I thought, thank God I talked to him before I made a horrible mistake. Many years later, and I had left Disney, and I was working as a writer and as an illustrator, and somebody offered me a job doing storyboards. And I needed the work, so I said yes, fearful that this was going to end my career. And I storyboarded a music video for Chicago, Stay the Night. And I got set down in between the director and the DP, and they immediately started asking me all kinds of questions about how I would do what I would do. And I found that from the very first day I did the job, it was completely different than I had been warned about, that it actually led me to have the opportunity to both write and direct and occasionally to produce. And I don't think that the guy that I talked to who was doing Herbie Goes Banana had lied to me. That was his experience. But this is a job where everybody brings something different to the table. It was a product of his time. He maybe had fewer opportunities, but storyboarding has turned out to be a really rich profession for me.
Someone told me that I wouldn't even be able to make a living doing storyboards, so I should try.
Oh, yeah?
And I wanted to prove them wrong, so I said I have to do it.
As careers making a living drawing go, this one's pretty good, I would
Wait,
say.
you guys are getting paid? I'm just doing it. I'm just doing
Oh,
it for
we
the
weren't
free
supposed
swag.
to. We weren't supposed to tell Aaron that.
Yeah, I'm similar to Josh and Amy, and I mean, there's a lot of similarities in our paths. I grew up on a farm in Ohio with no TV, so when I first discovered comics, I really thought I wanted to work in comics, and then I saw Star Wars, which is now Episode 4, and I thought I wanted to do special effects. I wanted to build models, and so I was building models for a while, but I always drew, and I didn't know what storyboards were. I didn't know I didn't even know they existed until I saw the Joe Johnson, I think it was for Empire Strikes Back. Joe Johnson had a sketchbook with incredible concept designs, storyboards, everything was just laid out there, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is something I really, really want to do. So I started off, when I first came to LA, I started off working in comics. I was part of Top Cow, Mark Silvestri's studio, and then I quickly started working in advertising, and kind of like Amy, and I think Josh as well, a lot of us, you start off storyboarding like music videos. This is back when MTV actually played music videos. And I went from music videos to commercials, and then from commercials into live action. I think the first live action film I worked on was a movie called Virus, with John Bruno, who was James Cameron's VFX director. This is his directorial debut. And that movie was kind of a nightmare, but it got my foot in the door, and then once my foot was in the door, I'm like, I never want to stop doing this. It's just kind of the best job in the world when you get paid to do something that you actually love to do. I mean, we're all pretty lucky.
That's the spirit.
Yeah. No, I didn't actually have art in high school. I didn't drop out until like 25. I went to the Kubert school, so Joe Kubert was my teacher. Ooh, sorry. Hello. So Joe Kubert was my teacher, and I wanted to be a fantasy illustrator, so I did that for a while, and the money was awful, and I couldn't make it work. And I talked to Christian Holtzman 2011. He's like, you got to go to LA if you want to work in film. So I left, and I came here, and it was a struggle, working in music videos and reality TV. And then I met a couple guys and realized what you can do in film, and I wouldn't do anything else. Like, it's so great. Like, working with some of my favorite directors who made my childhood, like, it's the dream.
I'm just ready to do it. Then it's what about you did?
when I was growing up, my dad was a brilliant guy. He was a successful commercial director. He wasn't a good dad, but he was a really good director. Wow. And well, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, and back then, and I mean, I was a kid. They had he had an advertising company, and they had a bullpen. And back then, it wasn't like it is now. They had these full-time guys, these old guys, with like suspenders and the cigar and the Glenlivet. And it's like, it's just like drawing Spider-Man, except it's a bastard holding the Pepsi. Go, you know. And by the time I graduated high school, I had done about $200,000 worth of free boards from my dad. And so obviously I had a problem with it for a while. And then when I moved to LA, and notice how many of these stories start with, oh, I had no idea I was going to end up doing this. It all comes from somewhere else. And I just came and similar to Aaron, we had a background in comics, and it just, comics is all about, and I say this as, I love comics. I love comics. And I have mad respect for comic artists, but the problem with comics for me personally is that comics are all about the polish and the finish, and it's beautiful and collectible and illustrative, and I just don't have the patience for it. Where storyboards are much more immediate and gestural, and it's about getting stuff done, and it's much more about storytelling as a discipline as opposed to illustrating, and it's just a better fit. And I just love movies, I love TV, I love telling stories, so I just think it was a better fit than comics. But there's a lot of shared literacy, I think, with film and TV and comics, because really when you boil it down, it's all about storytelling. It's storyboards especially, I always felt, was less about drawing than about storytelling as a discipline. Drawing is just the means to that end. Like, you have to be able to draw, but truthfully, and you guys can chime in, on most big productions, nobody cares. And I'm not saying that to be cynical. I mean, it's a function of what we do, that you're doing a tool where you're essentially directing the film on paper before they direct it with cameras. So, you know, you can put all this loving, lavish work into it, and then the most praise you'll get is like some associate producer. You know, like when you give someone a cup of coffee that's better than they expect, and they go, that's it. That's all you'll get. So, you know, and again, I'm not being cynical. It's just, it's a practical, it's a statement of fact, and but that immediacy is part of why I like it. So tell me about you guys. I mean, a couple of you touched on it, but like, are you all in the union? Do you all have like a getting in the union story or breaking in?
I'm not in the union. I was in the union, but I'm not now.
With security.
Yeah. But see, Doug's kind of an exception. Like, Doug's forgotten more about doing this than most of us have learned yet. And while we were scrambling to get our union memberships, he was like directing features and TV, and like, Doug is
I'll vouch for him. He's the best.
Doug's a legend. So, all right, well, that's interesting. So how do you maintain, you've done so much work, how do you do that without, how do you sidestep the unions?
I wasn't in the union for most of my early career. I worked on independent films, and most of the connections that I had were, this was back in the 80s. There was a lot of independent filmmaking going on in Los Angeles, so there were a lot of jobs. I worked on a number of films in those days that got unionized, and I would get a letter saying that you had to join the union or stop working on this project immediately. However, I always got those letters about a month after I had stopped working on the film. So I had the option, but all of my connections were in independent filmmaking, and so I just kept doing that. And I think because I was working on smaller films, I didn't get paid as much as some of my peers that I thought were at my same skill level, but I worked a lot more than most of them did. And the things that I worked on actually were the kinds of things that led to opportunities to do things
like because you directed a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I segued from doing storyboards to directing on a film called Army of Darkness for Sam Raimi. I had storyboarded that film, and a lot of what we do in storyboarding is writing. We write with pictures. And I think a good way to think of the job is we don't illustrate the scripts, we translate the scripts. We're translating it from a written medium into a visual medium. I had my take on this was developed when I actually wrote scripts that I then got to direct. when I did that, and I knew that as a writer, my job was to get the project sold, to get the project approved so that we could all go on work. So you write things in a language that everybody can understand. If you actually wrote a scene the way you were going to shoot it, it would be too dense, it would be unreadable. So you write in simplified terms, you write in a way that everybody can understand it, and then once it gets approved, in my case, and I took off my writing hat and I put on my directing hat, or more specifically, I put on my storyboard hat, the first thing I did is curse the writer for giving me the script that was just, I would never actually visualize it the way I wrote it. So it's a different process. I have great respect for writing, and for the scripts are very important. But we are translating. We are not just illustrating. And you have to kind of think about it like translating poetry even. It's not even so much just translating literature. If you were to take a poem and get a dictionary and translate it from one language to another word for word, you might be true to the language, but you would kill the poem. And so it's a similar thing with what we do. We always have to be respectful to the script, but we are telling the story in a different language. So I think it's very important to think like a writer when you do that.
My favorite memory of that, and I think it's a film that you and I both worked on, Doug, but there was a line, a single sentence in the script that said, "Massive battle scene, TBD." And that one sentence, what was like 3 months of my life? How long was it for you?
It's like 1,000 frames.
Yeah, it's like armies of thousands.
I have a folder in my computer where I will actually screen capture lines like that in these screenplays we work on, and it's things like action beats to follow, or there's a fight, lots of stunts, and so even some people that we work with in the film business are surprised when I'll show them this, because it's a big part of what keeps us employed, to be honest, because the writers have a very difficult job, and sometimes they have to, bump up a dialogue scene so that this actress will sign on to the movie, for instance, and they simply aren't available to come up with all the specifics of a big action scene. And they know that they've got us, they've got the previs people, they've got the really talented stunt coordinators, all that stuff. So that is a big part of what keeps us employed, is we're helping them to write the thing as well as visualize it a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Thank you
very much
for that. But yeah, big respect to the writers. They have a hard job.
I really liked how you said that we're translating, because I've never heard that before, and I think that's really accurate. That we're taking written word and putting it into visual medium, and we have to learn how to convey emotion, and through the words on the script might seem a little bit cold, but when we talk to the directors, then they'll tell us we want this kind of mood, we want the audience to feel this, and then so we have to translate that to make sure that the audience, we do our best to convey that through composition, through lighting, through staging, through pacing, and so I think that's a really good way to put it.
And I think one of the best ways to learn how to do that on a film is to create your own content. I always encourage people, draw your own stories whenever you can.
Yeah.
Because then you start thinking, when you draw your own story, you have to think like a writer.
And also, like, piecing together their notes that make everything else make sense. Like, I had one where, like, there's a thing happening 400 feet away, but then all of a sudden he is scarily close. I'm like, that's not close.
Yeah.
So I have to make it make sense. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to take what you said, what I think you mean, along with what I think is right, and there you go.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's right. Like, because I like, you said you wanted this specific thing done, but it makes it all gibberish here. And then it's usually fine.
Where I've had situations where, like, character walks into, this is just an example, like, character walks somewhere, you think they have nothing in their hand, and then you get to, like, 5 pages later, all of a sudden they have a prop in their hand. They're like, where did this come from?
Where'd that
you have
gun
to go
come from?
back.
I just did it.
Go back and figure out, well, where did the character get this gun? And we have to go back to our
Guy
board.
loses his gun as he falls. There was a gun.
There was a gun, I didn't know.
I can't speak for everybody, but I know for a fact a couple of us have worked on huge movies. 2/3 of the way through the production, $150, $200 million. And 2/3 of the way through, they're like, what are we going to do about the third act?
It's always that third act.
No, and
It's always.
Yeah.
giant
Yeah,
battle.
I'm happy if I find $20 in a pair of shorts I haven't worn in a while. And you're $200 million in this movie, and you don't know how it's going to end. So invariably, and again, I'm not trying to be cynical. It's just these are practical things that you deal with storyboarding, particularly in live action, because it's so bureaucratic. So you're getting notes and observations from so many different people, and there's so many different people in the chain, and so much of what you get is contradictory. You know, right? See, he doesn't even have to say it.
I just did in April. I worked at a Sony film where they're like, we don't have a third act. They gave four of us the same script. Like, you all do your version of it. We'll cut it together.
Yeah, like it's pit fighting.
A lot of people don't know that the film, when you see the making of a film and the director is talking or different department heads, it's always this interview where it's sort of like, we're mavericks. We really broke the mold on this one and blah, blah. Well, making a movie, like big movies have big problems, and they have a release date usually, and they're chasing the release date. But there's so many forces trying to get to that perfect film, and we're just a small part of it. But if you're interested in storyboarding, I really suggest you study the screenwriting a bit and story especially, because that's what you're called upon to do, is to fix stuff that isn't working. Like, for instance, if a lot of times I'll see in the third act always two giant ideas that are competing. They don't work together, but you have to make them work together. And so understanding story and story skills really help, because I'm just the storyboard artist. I can't tell them, hey, we have too many ideas, let's take that one out. I have to try to make it work. And when you get the screenplay for a movie that has come out, that's not the screenplay that we're working on, believe me.
I want to kind of go back to your original question about how we got in the union.
Oh, yeah.
So, but it's kind of connecting everything. So, like everybody expressed, we all started out, kind of somewhere else and went through this process. So like I mentioned, I started off doing independent, AFI student films and independent films, similar to Doug. And then I did work in music videos. And so one of my first jobs was an independent film starring Monique called Fat Girls. And I happened to get the job because the director, and this was a job that was posted on Craigslist at the time, and they were all offering like $100 or $150 to board the whole movie.
What?
And I did it because I didn't know. I just needed a portfolio, and the woman happened to be from a neighborhood not far from where I grew up, so we connected. And then so I did basically the whole movie for like $150. I was so happy, and then I got.
And that's like 0.00 cent per frame.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
they forgot my name on the credits. Anyway. No, well, but the producers of that film appreciated me, so they called me back for another movie with a little bit more money, like $500. And then they called me back for a third movie, and that third movie was 500 Days of Summer. And I got connected with Mark Webb. And then he hired me to do his music videos and his commercials. And then he got Spider-Man. So I wasn't in the union until then, but because of him, he brought me on to Spider-Man.
Nice.
And so that's how I got in the union. But this process, even though it seems like, and the reason I wanted to go back to this story was this whole process, it seems like, oh, you might, I don't know how you all feel or where you're at in your careers, but you might feel like I'm below, that work is below me, that's menial work. Actually, all of that work gave me the skills to be able to problem solve.
Yeah.
So by the time I did even though I too was like, I want to work on a big movie, I have to be honest, if I didn't go through that 8 years of all of that, I wouldn't have had the skills, the patience, the understandings to know how a film process works from an independent film with no money, where you have to be really creative with your shots and, be really, what's the word? Economical, and really understand how everything works. And time, the commercials and the music videos really taught me deadlines, for example. And so that's how I felt like I was able to get to this point.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because Aaron asked us to give 10 samples of our drawings, and one of them, it's all movie stuff, but one of the ones I put in purposefully was Ronald McDonald on some like, ridiculous, thing, this commercial I did. But I put it in there because of exactly the point Amy is making. Like, at the time, I spent like 8 years or something doing TV commercials and some music videos, and I didn't like it. It was a difficult job. But looking back, I'm so thankful that I did that because I learned everything. I got paid to learn. I didn't have any student loans. And I had to draw all this stuff I never would have drawn on my own, like salad bars and, all kinds of junk. And so when I finally got into film, I had a lot of skills. I had people skills, business skills, drawing skills,
Bow
story
staff skills, nunchuck skills.
Xeroxing skills.
Drawing power.
And I was really thankful for that. It was a good job. It just at the time I was like, I'm drawing tennis shoes. What am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
But that's, oh no, go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, no, I was just going to say my path was really similar to Amy's because I started off in comics and then, working in commercials and music videos. It was like getting paid to go to art school because my parents were too poor. I didn't have money to go to art school, and we didn't really have conventions like this yet. They were just kind of getting big. And so, I would have killed to go to art center, and then I ended up teaching at art center for a few years a while back. But Amy's absolutely right because I desperately wanted to get into features, but same thing. I wasn't ready. I would have probably gotten fired on my first job. So really taking that time, that few years to kind of pay my dues and learn the basics and the patience, it turns you into a whole different artist.
Because it's an all-encompassing job. I think we've talked about this on productions. You have a huge production. It's, like I said, very bureaucratic, all these people. And you forget that we're the only person on the whole crew with the word story in our job title. Like, it's not about drawing. It's all of that stuff. It's very much storytelling as a discipline and problem solving more than anything. And to Josh's point, years ago, might have been the first year I met you at Comic-Con, like way, way, way back. I had a portfolio review for DC by the brilliant but ruthless Neil Adams, for those of you that know him. He's notorious for literally bringing you to tears. Like, that was a badge of honor. Like, I just got a review from Neil Adams. He told me, he's going to hit my mom. So he looked at all the stuff, and, I got away relatively unscathed, where he liked more than he hated. But one of the things that he said that always stuck with me that relates directly to this is he's like, okay, you can do all the superhero bullshit, and that's fine, whatever. Everybody knows how to do that. He's like, show me a guy, a 70-year-old guy in Brooklyn in a seedy local bar, drowning his sorrows at a table because his wife just died in the hospital. Show me that. He's like, show me a woman making eggs in a kitchen at 3 in the morning in Tucson. And it sounds ridiculous on its face, but it's the specificity of it, is that so many times there's so many projects, so many scripts, such a variety of stories. And they take it for granted when you come onto a job like that. That has to be in your toolbox. It's not just being able to draw the stuff, it's being able to know how to research and to draw authentically. If you want to do this, other than what these guys have said, which have been some brilliant tips, I would also recommend take some acting classes. Not to become well, maybe, but so much of what you do as a storyboard artist is you're capturing gestures and facial expressions. And again, it all goes to storytelling. Something as simple as a gesture or someone's face can communicate a whole paragraph from a script. And if you have a mastery of that, if you understand the language that directors use to communicate to actors or that actors use to communicate their story beats, it's a huge help. But all of these things, like, there's no kind of one path. Like, we all have all these different experiences, but there's a shared literacy where we all kind of have to know all this stuff. And it's cool. It's a fun way to kind of integrate all these different parts of filmmaking into one thing. So to that end, each of you, give me a favorite gig that you've had. We've talked about some low points and some starter points. Like, give me a best case scenario. Give me your favorite gig.
Why is everybody looking at me? I would probably have to say Army of Darkness. Working with Sam Raimi on that film was a lot of fun. And actually, then I could add to that every other film I've done with Sam Raimi right after. But Army of Darkness was really guerrilla filmmaking, and the fact that I got to go from drawing the scenes to directing scenes was a big plus. We were working we're shooting out in Acton in the desert where we built a castle. It was supposed to be England. It was in the middle of the desert. Tippi Hedren's lion preserve was right across the road from us, so we could hear the lions roaring. And it was miserable. It was hot during the day. It was freezing at night. And when we were all done, I was really depressed because I thought, when will I get to shoot something on a castle again? But it turned out most of my career ended up me shooting things on castles. But
Be careful what you wish for.
but what I will say, though, is that was a non-union film. Sam Raimi wasn't even in the Directors Guild. I actually got into the Directors Guild before Sam did, which is a weird thing. So when I started directing on that, I was getting paid the same thing I was getting paid for storyboarding, but it was prorated for only the days that I worked. And I was only working like 1 or 2 days a week, and sometimes a week or two would go by. And I had a house. I had house payments. I had to keep working. So I took a job storyboarding Wayne's World at Paramount. So I would be up all night directing second unit on Army of Darkness, and I would go over to Paramount and work during the day, and I was very sleep deprived. I worked with, Nancy Myers was a director, met Mike Myers, and they were filming one of the Star Trek series nearby, because I would look out my window when I was sleep deprived, and I'd see Klingons walk by. Very surreal. But I spent most of the pandemic working with Sam on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, so we're still good friends. And Sam actually produced the TV shows that I first directed on down in New Zealand, Hercules and Xenon.
No, nobody else. Give me your best gig. Give me your best gig.
Favorite gig?
Go.
Oh, good. No, you
No.
go.
So mine was kind of heartbreaking. I got to do the prologue for Fright, and I got a couple weeks to come up with this really cool, dynamic story about how the Dark Lord took over and, like, basically why everything's happening in this film. And I have, I think, a couple frames in there. Like, I illustrated the whole thing. I was going to do this 2.5D thing where the thing kind of shift and, like, describe all the things that make the whole movie make sense. And then they threw it in the trash, and they end up doing, like, graffiti on the wall that said nothing. Like, it literally didn't tell any of the story. I'm like, this would have been made all this stuff make sense. But I would be up till midnight, and I'm drawing orcs and monsters, and, like, I drew this one where this 60-foot tall smoke monster thing was behind this army of people were going over a mountain, hundreds and hundreds of characters, but I enjoyed it so much, been chasing that for years. And I get some of that, but, like, that one in particular was so much fun.
My favorite of mine as a kid was the original Planet of the Apes movie. So, of course, working on a couple of those was highlight. But earlier in my career, I was doing TV commercials and music videos, and I met Roman Coppola, the son of Francis Coppola. And driving to the job, I thought, who is this guy going to be? What's this going to be like? And he turned out to be a wonderful, really creative, generous guy. And we just hit it off right away. So I worked on dozens of jobs with him over those years, and those were some of the funnest, most creative jobs I ever did, because he was doing music videos, trying to innovate. He was trying to get commercial work that was very creative. Sometimes he didn't get the jobs, but he helped me to I learned a lot, and also to really believe in my own ideas, because coming to Hollywood with no education, I just always was like, you know, all these people have gone to film schools, they grew up in the business, what do I know? And I realized a lot of them don't know anything, like William Goldman, the writer, said, and they need my help. And I also wanted to say what you said about specificity. TV commercials are very specific, hyper-specific, and that really helped me. And I also liked what Amy said. Like, I don't think that director would have brought you on to Spider-Man if you hadn't been consistently solving problems for him over the years. And that comes from a variety of experiences. It might be a humble music video or something.
Yeah, you never know where it's going to come from.
That's actually a great point. What Josh has said is solving problems, because as much as we're telling stories and we're telling them in a visual medium, we are solving production problems day in and day out, especially when you're on set. I mean, since COVID, I just wrapped on a Marvel show that's filming in the UK, and you don't really get to go anywhere anymore, but I do kind of miss being on set. So for me, the quick answer is that I grew up loving comics. I got to work with Stan Lee himself when he was doing Stan Lee Media back in 1999 for like online content, which was kind of a dream come true. And then now since I've been doing so many movies for Marvel and so many superhero shows, Warner Brothers as well, it's kind of cool because I've kind of come full circle with my love for superheroes. I'm not doing comic books anymore, but I'm doing all these comic book characters that I grew up with, and it really, really is cool. But as far as the specific job, I was working on a show they were filming down in Mexico called Fear the Walking Dead. And whenever I tell people about that, they're like, "Oh, I love The Walking Dead." I'm like, "Yeah, it's not that one. It's the other one. It's Fear the Walking Dead, the one that nobody knows about, but still has like 7 billion viewers." So I was there, and I came down there to replace the storyboard artist, I think, who had just gotten fired or let go because he wasn't solving the problems. And so when I got there, I took Josh's advice, and I tried to make myself as valuable as I could to the production. The showrunner, who was also one of the creators of the show, when I got there, he's like, "I don't know why you're here. I don't like storyboards. I don't use storyboards." And I'm like, "Wow, this is going to be because I was supposed to be there for 16 episodes. It's like 7 months in Mexico, which is good and bad. But I was very nervous, and I wanted to make sure that I solved all these problems. So I went to the stunt coordinators. I went to the VFX department, even the people making the props, and the DP, the camera department. I tried to find out like what they needed and how I could help them solve their problems. So the more you ingrain yourself in that process, the art department, I mean, they always lump us in with the art department because we draw. But like Jeff said, we're storyboard artists, and we really, story comes first and foremost, but we don't really fit into the art department per se, but that's where they always put us if we're on location. Usually, unless the director requests that you be by them, but most of the time we're sitting in the art department. So that was just a fun challenge because I think by the second or third episode, because in TV, every episode's a new director, but the showrunner's always there. And I remember the director came in for, I think it was the second or third episode, and he was like, "Well, where's the old guy?" And he's like, "Oh, no." He's like, "This is Aaron. We traded up." So I actually won him over, because at first he was like, "I don't even use storyboards. I don't know what they're good for." So I made it my mission to show him how I could help solve all these problems. And one of the first things I did, I said, because they would do director scouts all this time, and I was like, "Can I go on the director scout and take reference photos?" And it never occurred to them to invite the storyboard artist on the scouts. And that solved a lot of problems right there. So just really simple things that you can do. And every production is different. So what you did on one production might not work on another show. But I think I do kind of miss being in person on the set or on the studio lot, because you can just walk next door and talk to other departments.
Nice. Mine would be probably I worked for Sam for a long time after Doug did. And it was like getting paid to go to film school. And objectively, he's one of the coolest dudes ever. Like, even if he wasn't Sam Raimi and wasn't this hugely successful director, just as a person, he's like a cuddly little
You would be
koala.
very hard pressed to find anybody that doesn't like to work with Sam Raimi in this industry.
And I know. And I worked on a couple things that he had produced, and then they called me in to do Spider-Man 4, which ended up getting unceremoniously trashed. But I remember one of the highlights.
But then I got in the union, so thank you.
Huh?
I said, but then I got in.
I know. But one of the things that the fondest memories I have of doing this is when I went in to meet Sam for the first time, went into his office at Sony, and I was nervous, and I don't get nervous that much, but I was a huge fan. I mean, really, really, truly was a huge fan of his work and of his whole thing, and a Spider-Man geek. And I went in and I was all built up that it's going to be this thing. And he comes over, he's like, "Hey, buddy, come on over." And then he pulls out a box of action figures. And he starts playing with them, and he's like, "Okay, I want to have the Vulture over here, and then Spider-Man's going to go, psh, psh, and then a helicopter's going to hit him." And I started laughing, like, spontaneously. I couldn't help. It's like an anime where I have, like, little hearts over my I'm like, I love Sam. And he stops, and he's like, "Why are you laughing?" And I'm like, what effing alternate reality did I wake up in where I'm in your office playing action figures with you to do a new Spider-Man movie? You know? And then that's when it hits you, like all the mundane processes that can be so frustrating, or all the sleepless nights. Or like Amy said, I mean, and it's not just for storyboarding. I mean, writers, actors, directors, anything creative and entertainment, the whole paying your dues thing is a cliche for a reason, because it's really true. And like, it's a trade-off. Sure, you get beat up, or you get demoralized, or you don't sleep, or you don't make a lot of money. But learning how to navigate that is absolutely invaluable, because the technical drawing stuff, that comparatively is easy to learn. It's easy to learn perspective. It's easy to get better at anatomy. It's easier to draw better hands because there's one at the end of your wrist, you know. But when it comes to navigating the politics of dealing with executives and studio people and directors and megalomaniacs, and there's no substitute for the experience of it, and it's really, really important. And even if it's really frustrating, even if it's really disarming or demoralizing, you have to understand how to get through it enough to where it doesn't affect your work, or you're not blowing deadlines, you're turning in bad work, or you're not solving the problems, because that's literally why you're there. So, you know. So what about, let me see, where are we at for time?
What was the question before? I forgot.
Oh,
Or
favorite
job. I
gig.
didn't get to answer yet.
Favorite gig.
Favorite
Oh,
gig.
favorite gig. Yeah, no, so I wanted to jump off of what you said about, getting to a point where you don't feel demoralized. Once you start working, there are really good people in the industry, and so for me, I don't know if I could choose one specific gig, but I now really just appreciate, even if the script is bad, if the producers, if the team of people that I'm working with are like decent people, and you can enjoy, like, it's not a water cooler anymore, the K-cup machine, whatever. You're out, in the kitchen grabbing snacks and just hanging out.
Jeff and I both worked on After Earth. Sometimes you have the best times on the worst movies.
Yeah, no.
Oh, man.
So, like,
Currently 9% on Rotten Tomatoes. Thank you.
the best job isn't necessarily the best movie, but
Yeah,
it's
that's true.
it's the movies that I've made friends on, or I've learned a skill, or I felt like they treated me, and this is going to sound stupid but true, they gave me an office with a window, like, where I can look out.
No, that's
You don't normally, I don't know why we always get offices with no windows, but but this is so one of my favorite gigs, though. This is The End, directed by Seth Rogen.
Great movie.
So I got brought in for reshoots for the ending, and like,
I know where this is going.
and then they were like, if anybody wants to come see the Backstreet Boys, you can come see us shoot. I was like, I'm there. I know. And it was like the reunion. They hadn't been together for how many years? It was so cool. So it was real fun.
nice. So I want to navigate, because in case any of you guys have any questions, so each of you, if you could give one piece of advice above and beyond like what we've already talked about, like what would like, give me a pearl. Give one good solid piece of advice. If they want to be storyboard artists, or they aspire to do this.
Well, there's I think that there's three aspects of this job. There is drawing, filmmaking, and storytelling, and they're all equally important. You can kind of think about it, make it read, make it work, make it engage. So make it read is the drawing part of this skill, make it work is the filmmaking, because you have to draw something that's actually shootable, and make it engage is the storytelling. The storytelling is, I think, they're all important. I think the storytelling is the most important, and one of the most important skills that you can learn to do that is learn how to make the audience a participant in the story instead of a victim of the story. And if you can be a victim of something that's nice. I mean, you could be just throwing cool shit at the audience, just interesting shots, interesting composition, beautiful images. But if you can't make the audience participate, anticipate what's going on, and make them a participant in the story, I think is the most important skill.
Okay.
I would say don't waste your youth. I'm so happy that I was in financially, I just had to make this work, and I didn't have the luxury of really screwing around and doing nothing when I was 26. And you're never going to be, when you're young, you're never going to be sharper and have more energy and frankly more time than when you're young. So put the time in every day to practice drawing and do this and that. And the other thing I think is very important is it's very different than when I was starting out, because there was no internet and I wasn't able to see everybody's greatest work. So now you have the whole world on the internet. You can look at my website. That's only my very best work. It doesn't show you all the crap that I do day to day. So don't get intimidated. That's really important advice, I think. Don't just start to get discouraged, and you can go to rodolfodimaggio.com and go, because
I still do that.
yeah, I mean, there's so much great work out there, but
His stuff makes me want to just go work in a shoe store.
absolutely, he's a genius and a very nice guy, by the way.
Yes.
But yeah, I would say don't let yourself get discouraged, because what you're looking at is everybody's portfolio. It's my greatest samples. It's not
the kind of thing I'm cranking out on a random Tuesday. If it's a good Tuesday, yes, but don't discourage yourself and don't waste your time. Keep going, work.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I think one of the things that I thought, especially coming from comics where everything was, I mean, I was like 18, I was 17 or 18 when I broke into comics, and it was kind of competitive. I mean, it was Image Comics and all that, competitive in a good way and a bad way, but I always thought that your peers were your competition, so I always thought, well, if I can draw a little bit better than Josh, then maybe I'll get the job before Josh gets it, and it's not that way at all. I mean, quite the contrary. I think your peers, everybody I'm up here with right now, I consider them all friends. We've all worked together, although I think this is my first time actually meeting Amy in person. But really, it's just so inspirational to be in a group like this because it's really small. I mean, if you look at the Art Directors Guild, and we're a small part of that. I think it's like, what, 3,000 people? And
we are 284.
You heard that right, 284 artists in Los Angeles, and it's a very small group. So just everybody kind of knows, yeah, be nice. Everybody knows everybody. Your reputation is going to carry you a long way, or it might hinder you. So you want to be nice all the time. And I've learned so much from all these people up here. I mean, Doug, oh my gosh, he knows more about storyboarding than, you know, he's forgotten more about storyboarding than I'll ever know. But it's just really cool, especially when you're a student. Again, since COVID, you know, working remotely, you don't get this anymore, but, you know, we'll be on a job at like 3rd floor or someplace, and there'll be a bunch of us, 6 or 7 of us sometimes, just all sitting next to each other, and I can look over at Jeff and see what he's doing, or Josh is doing something different, and it's very inspirational. So I would say, I mean, you guys are in a perfect place and a perfect time because social media being what it is, you guys can always keep on tabs with people and network, and I think, so I would say, yeah, definitely, you know, your peers are not your competition. Your peers, if anything, are going to, I think I've got more work from my friends, from fellow storyboard artists, than I ever did when I had an agent. And the agent took 25%. So it's nice to have that group that you can rely on. And the last thing I would say is just be flexible and think about problem solving, because every production is different. If I'm doing a job at 3rd floor or for some previous company and they want quick little thumbnails and I'm doing 30, maybe 40 frames a day and they don't look pretty, I'm not going to put them in my portfolio, but they're quick enough so the previous artist can get started rendering out the scene. So something like that isn't going to look pretty, but then sometimes a lot of these boards up here are presentation boards where, you know, we're working After Earth and we're pitching a whole new ending to the head of Sony or whoever it was, and we had to render them up and make them look really pretty. So sometimes you get to spend the time and put the love into the drawing, but a lot of times you just got to do those quick sketches and, you know, figure out what the job requires and then do your best to accommodate that.
Yeah, yeah, I would, there's the long list past that. It's like, you are not your drawings. Don't get too offended when people want to change stuff. Like, I worked on a film where I was doing like 70 frames a day for months, and they're trash. They don't look good at all. They tell the story. It's cheaper by the dozen, 13 people in a house. They're all changing rooms, but you have to keep track of everybody. And I wouldn't have shown that to anybody. Nobody. Like, a lot of times it's just like people's names with an arrow, like this kid gets hit in the face, and he goes over here, he's crying, and the mom, the other mom, the other mom, the other mom. And then I work for Scott Derrickson right now, and he's like, your website's great, show me your rough stuff. No, no, no. And that's what got me hired. Like, literally that family movie got me on a horror sci-fi film.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah, I was, yeah, that hurt my feelings.
One of the things I want to add to what everybody said is, and I think it's so important, that is like as everyone's mentioned, we're hired to solve problems. We're hired to help people translate a story. So we're work for hire. So my advice is to make sure that you have your own artwork to keep yourself sane, and don't consider the art that you're doing for these other people your artwork. I know that it sounds weird, but we are putting our own ideas into helping someone else's story get made, but they will tear up your artwork if it's who was it mentioned that you know you can do this beautiful rendering and it's like the cup of coffee. It's like, oh, thanks, you know.
And to Amy's point, it's very much what I was going to say. Is like, I'm just saying this as a statement of fact, but don't care so much. And I'm not advocating like doing bad work or being unprofessional. I don't mean that. I just mean, I feel that creative people, the mechanism that allows you to be creative, that door swings both ways. It also, I think creative people, by virtue of being creative, are more vulnerable to being insecure. You feel things more deeply. You're depressed. You're anxious. You don't sleep. All that, a litany, that's no joke. Like, looking historically, all the brilliant creative people whose stories end tragically. Like the 27 Club with rock stars, that's no joke. Like, it's a real thing. And a lot of times it's easy to attach your self-worth or attach your self-perception to the work that you do. And I absolutely agree with Amy. Like, try to keep them mutually exclusive. Like, be professional, do the work, but don't get wrapped up, because trust me, I know what I'm talking about with this. If you, everything else I say you dismiss and think I'm a clown, take this with you, because I really mean it. There will be events in your life that will demand that kind of emotional investment, that will leave you on your knees, it will reduce you to rubble. This should never be it, ever.
Yep.
There is no part of this that is worth that kind of investment emotionally, or driving yourself crazy, or not. Like, not sleeping to get work done is one thing, but I mean, I've seen people like torment themselves over this stuff, and not only do I think it's unhealthy, but I also think it affects your work negatively, because we've all touched on it. It's a bureaucratic process. Like, it's not personal. If you have 10 different producers who are all giving you contrary notes and there's $200 million at stake, of course they're all freaking out. Like, embrace the chaos. It's never going to be right. And if you blow a deadline, if it doesn't get done, guess what? The sun will rise tomorrow. It's going to be fine. Like, and I just think so much is when you're in the thick of that process where you're getting the work done and you're doing the stuff, it's so intense and everyone comes at you that it's so important and it's so urgent and the whole world's going to fall apart. And it's, people say never say never. I'm saying never. That's never true. That's never true.
Jeff, to add on, there was a point in my career where I was scared to admit that I couldn't do a job by a deadline.
Oh, yeah.
And I would stay up all night.
Sure.
And then one time I was just like, you know what will happen if I told the producer I can't do it? And you know what they said? Let's get you help.
Yeah.
And if you say, like, I can't do this, like, not because you're being lazy, but honestly, the workload is just too much. Like, you have to be honest to yourself. You have to take care of yourself, because your work will suffer, your life will suffer. Again, not to say, we still think, well, I think that we've all been saying, pay your dues, we're not saying you have bad work ethic, but this is a job in the end of the day. At the end of the day, this is a job.
Yeah, and manage expectations too,
Yeah.
because a lot of directors and producers, they have no idea how long it takes us to do this stuff, They just look at, some people, some directors do, but a lot of producers, they want a certain number of frames every day. Thankfully, I think it's moving a little bit away from that. But in the beginning, I've worked for producers like that, where they're like, I got to have 40 frames today, or this or that, and it just, you don't do your best work, you don't get your best work doing things like that.
And it's arbitrary.
So I think what Amy just said about, managing expectations or asking for help, don't be afraid to ask for help, because, look at how many storyboard artists worked on those Spider-Man movies.
All of them.
There's so many. That's why it takes so many people. You can have it fast, you can have it cheap, or you can have it good. Pick two. You can't get all three.
Yeah.
Yeah. So real quick, we got, 5 or 10 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions?
Go for it, Jeff.
Okay. You go. You're right here.
One of the masks.
You have to talk like Bane with the mask on.
The guy in the mask.
Did you ever have to change your drawing styles based on what the art director was looking for?
Sure. I worked on has anybody been to Universal Studios? I worked on the Simpsons ride. I got to storyboard the Simpsons ride with Tim Miller and Blur. I think Tim went on to direct Deadpool and Terminator and all these. He's a great director, really fun. Blur is a lot of fun working for us. So when I worked on the Simpsons ride, I'd never drawn the Simpsons before, but I was a huge fan. And then luckily, they didn't have to be 100% on model, because it was all going to be 3D CGI anyway. So I got to, one of my first really fun storyboard jobs was getting to draw the Simpsons, and that was awful.
I don't think I've ever been asked to draw in a different style. But that's such a specific thing that you had to do. I can understand why in that case you would, but in most cases, I would get hired because they'd seen my drawings, and that's what they wanted.
Yeah, similarly, I've been hired for what I draw. The only time was when I worked on a Shrek ride for Universal Dubai, and they wanted Shrek to be on model.
Yeah,
That was
makes
hard.
sense, yeah.
You got a question?
Oh, yeah. So, I work in animation for TV. I'm a storyboard artist for TV animation, and that world is so different from, like, live action. Like, I don't even know anyone in live action or, like, connections are strictly in, like, TV animation. What would you suggest if someone is, like, interested in the world of live action storyboarding, how they can go, like, animation without live action?
I put in time in TV animation, and I doubt that I'm the only one here on this panel who did, but I spent a lot of years when I at the third floor, and I head of story at the third floor, and a lot of people there who are probably the age of a lot of people here, one of the things that impresses them most on my IMDb page is that I worked on the Transformers TV series.
I did not know. That's so cool.
I would say, if you're interested in live action, don't be afraid to reach out on the internet to live action artists. Send an email, get on LinkedIn, but also be prepared by having some samples online already that is live action, because then we have something to talk about.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually, and I'd say this for everybody about whatever you want to do in your career. If you want to advance from into storyboards or from storyboards into directing or writing, is let people know what you like, and work on your own, do something of your own to show that you're engaged, that you're serious about it, and it also gives you something you can show to people when you do make contacts to keep them aware of who you are, remind them who you are. But don't be afraid to tell people what you want to do when you want to make that transition. And there's often opportunities to do things for people for a discount price or for free. It's worth it sometimes to do somebody's student film or to do somebody's low-budget project for a better price just to get the experience. I think everybody has said that here.
Just, I've never worked in animation, but one of the things that I've noticed that I would wish I could share is I noticed that people that work in animation, again, I'm stereotyping based on just what I've seen on the internets, but you don't necessarily get to develop your own style because you're drawing the style of someone else that tells you what to do. So if you want to go into live action, you have to develop your own style. We're not drawing cartoons. We're not drawing a character someone designed. So our stuff is not as cartoony. It's more comic booky because we all came, most of us here like comic books, but they really are looking for more, anatomically correct people, and being able to draw things more realistically. And so if you are, not you, but anybody in your position, wants to switch over, I would, suggest working on that, like doing storyboards where it is people or, not cartoon style. Yeah. Yeah,
to answer your question, some of the best storyboard artists in live action today, just off the top of my head, like Phil Norwood, Phil Langoni, who else? Yeah, Tom Nelson. Yeah. They come from animation, so it can be done. The good news. As far as the particulars, it's probably going to, like Josh said, get your portfolio together and then try to make the right contacts. But it's definitely something that can be done. And the great thing about working with those guys is not only they still have that bouncy energy and they're so dynamic. So I love working with guys that have a background in both.
But if you're a storyboard artist, you already have a lot of the stuff in the toolbox. You're just applying it. The aesthetic's a little different, and there's, the realism part of it. But I think you probably foundationally are probably more ahead of the curve that you think. I'd just do some live action samples and hustle, and you should be fine. Ooh, of course. Anybody else? I'm sorry, I can't listen. This gentleman here, and then that gentleman.
Hey, question for anybody. What's the biggest job that you turned down and why did you turn it down?
Ooh, that's a great question.
I'm going to answer generically and just say I've turned down projects because I didn't want to draw all that crap. And also, the other thing is I don't want to work with this a-hole. That's.
I'm sitting right here. You don't have to.
There are people who, it brings up one thing actually. Hollywood has this reputation of being filled with all these psychos, which it can be true, but my brother works in the corporate world, and the stories he tells me about the corporate world are horrible, just horrible. And that's not my experience in Hollywood, and I work directly with the directors and the producers. I will say also that because of Harvey Weinstein and the hashtag #MeToo and everything, it not only raised those important issues with women, but it in general kind of got Hollywood, I think, it's just my theory, to kind of clean house and get rid of some of the creeps and the freaks and just the bullies. I read the showbiz news sometimes, and they're firing people sometimes just because they're jerks. They didn't actually sexually harass someone. So the business is different than it looked 20 years ago, and so that's something that I wouldn't be too worried about. But yeah, I've turned down jobs plenty of times because I don't want to work with this director.
That's a great question. It's kind of weird because for me, in my experience, you don't really, either I'm booked or I'm not. So there's been a lot of times, and this is the only job that I've ever had where I'll get a call from a producer like Sony or, you know, Universal, whatever, and they're like, "Are you available?" And yes, I am. And there's a new show starting. Can you tell me what it is? No. Like, what other job does that? It's like, if it's a Smurfs movie, then I might not do it. But if it's a superhero movie, I might, you know? So sometimes they won't even tell you the subject matter because it's all super secret and you have to sign the NDA. And then even then, you know, it's so weird. I guess the biggest movie, I was actually on Fear the Walking Dead, and I got called to work on X-Men Dark Phoenix, and I was so bummed I couldn't take it because I was on Fear the Walking Dead.
You missed nothing.
Well, this is the best part. I had committed to 7 months at Fear the Walking Dead, and this is like 3 months in, and I wasn't going to leave Mexico and go to Canada for maybe only a couple of weeks. And then the good news is Bill got the job, and Bill said it was a bad experience, and I dodged a bullet. So,
along those lines, this wasn't turning it down as much as it was the only job I've quit outright. And I won't say what movie it was, but the director was such an asshole that it got to a point where I couldn't continue. In good conscience, I could no longer work for the guy. And it got so bad I actually go to the bathroom and have either Aaron, because it was when Aaron was working on the Fantastic Four remake, and his experience mirrored my own. So we would call each other and be like, "Dude, what are we gonna do?" "I don't know." He's like, "Just don't throw the guy out of the third-story window. It's not gonna help." And I'm like, "Yeah, what else?" He's like, "Quit, leave, you idiot. What are you talking about?" So that was the thing where this guy was so overtly terrible that I just couldn't abide. I just couldn't. So other than that, I mean, like Aaron said, it's kind of free form where you kind of take what you get. And then if you don't want it, you know, Josh made a great point. If it's something that doesn't appeal to your sensibilities or your skill set, you know, you just kind of, and usually we're all handing them off to each other anyway. Like, you know, me and Aaron have been playing ping pong with jobs for like 10 years.
Yeah, actually, I turned down that Fantastic Four movie because I interviewed with the director, and he was just a piece of work. He was young, and he was like, you know, there was 3 grown-ups in the room with him, and they were, you know, senior visual effects people, and they were asking me specific stuff about working closely with previs. I had a lot of experience with this, and so they really liked what I was saying and what I had to show them. And the director was sitting there, and he wasn't really saying anything. And then when it was his turn, he goes, "Are you good?" And I was like, I had my portfolio right there, and I said, "Well, I'm better than some, not as good as others." And he goes, "Are you fast?" And I said, "I'm faster than some." And then he says, literally, he goes, "Good, because it's going to hurt. I'm going to work you so hard, I'm going to hurt you." I looked at the grown-ups in the room.
Way to sell it, dude.
Yeah. So the meeting was over, and I was walking out, and the visual effects lady came up and she says, "I hope you'll reconsider. I can tell you're not going to take this job." I was like,
"I'm going to call my buddy Aaron. He'll do
call
it."
me anytime, and I'm with that.
Everybody that I knew got a call for that movie, and I didn't get a call, and I was super sad. I was like,
I was the last one. I was too dumb to say no.
But then I was like, oh, maybe I didn't want to call for that movie.
This gentleman right here has a question.
Yeah, Josh, I think you made a comment about a thing where the writers took another pass at the dialogue in order to get an actor. I was wondering, like, are storyboard artists also thinking about influencing other parts of production that are not the story, such as like cost savings, like by changing a shot, or what do you think?
Yeah, well, a lot of times I'll try and do something because I'll go to, well, this goes to what I was saying to Aaron, like I try to make myself as useful as possible to the production. So if there's a schedule and I can look at the schedule and see, oh, for that scene they were only shooting half a day, well then I'll realize, oh, I got to try to do this very efficiently in very few shots. And so I might just I might do that on my own, or I might talk to the first AD who made the schedule and say, "How come that's only a half a day?" And they'll say, "Well, here's the reason, and it's only half a day." And then other times, I'll put something in that, like if I overhear that they're not going to try to not do any visual effects shots for this thing, or only 3 visual effects shots, I'll try and make it all practical, meaning it's something they can actually get at camera, and then I'll, you know, make it so that they can. I'm not going to just ignore the realities of production, so I'll do things like that. And every once in a while, we'll put something in that we hope will end up in the film, like for War for the Planet of the Apes. I was working early on, and they didn't really have it worked out exactly what the apes that ran the prison camp were going to look like. So
they didn't use my idea, but I drew them with these sort of like ratty blankets on or something like that. And sometimes ideas of Mars make it in, and sometimes they don't. But for the purpose of the storyboard, you need something. A lot of times we're drawing things that are not designed yet. We're so early on that these people are not hired yet. It's one of the reasons that the production designers wish that they could change the clause so that we can't get hired until they're hired. But the reality is, I have to draw a whole sequence of people running away from an alien inside a spaceship, and there's no spaceship, so I have to make it up. Sorry, guys. So it helps. I'm not much of a designer, but it helps if you have, if you can invent stuff and realize the realities of filmmaking. I hope that answered your question.
So I think we're already over a little bit. So I think, and thank you so much. We really appreciate. Why don't everyone tell these fine folks how they can find you online?
DougLeffler.com.
AmyUmezuArt.com.
TheStoryboardArtist.com or movieboards on Instagram.
Just AaronSowd.com or Instagram Aaron Sowd.
BillThompsonArt.com.
And I'm at Planet Henderson or PlanetHenderson.com or whatever. But thank you so much for being here, you guys. Seriously, and I hope we helped. And if you have anything before stop it. Let us know either before we leave or out there. And I'm sorry we ran out of time. We could do this all day, but thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.